Call the Finance Committee meeting for Lancaster City Council to order.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion for the Finance Committee to move into executive session to consider the sale and or purchase of public property, the publication of which would be adverse to the city's interests. Pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 121.22G2, the executive session should include the following: council president, council members, law director, senior attorney, mayor, auditor, service safety director, and treasurer.
I will second that motion. We have a motion and a second to convene into executive session. Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
I'm a yes. We are in executive session.
Chairman McDaniel, I move for the Finance Committee to leave executive session and reconvene the regular meeting.
I will second that motion. Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
I'm a yes. We are back to the regular order of Finance Committee. The first thing we have on our agenda this evening is Resolution 13522, a resolution to authorize issuance of a then and now certificate to reimburse Fairfield County Common Pleas Court. This comes out of Public Works. Mr. Schoonover.
Yes. I'm sorry, this is news to me, but pretty self-explanatory, I think, because we already passed this and approved the repayment, but slightly over the $3,000 we have to issue a then and now. So we're just going to be asking for suspension on this tonight.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. It just happens to be $6 over the then and now requirement, and we're going to ask for suspension, and your second is
Ms. Sitterly.
Ms. Sitterly. Okay, we'll ask for suspension on 13522. Next item we have on the agenda is 13622, a resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the Parks and Recreation Fund 2012, and this is coming out of service. Ms. Sitterly.
Thank you. I think interim superintendent Thompson is here, but I can probably summarize pretty easily. We had a contract employee last year, and that was not renewed for this year, so we added a part-time employee in March, and it just never made the budget. So we need an additional $13,000. I think the actual outstanding is $12,500. Yeah, so we're just asking for a smidge over. That's pre-approved by the Park Board.
Okay. What's your pleasure on that?
3 readings.
And Mr. Matlin is the second on that?
Yes.
3 readings on 13622. Next item we have on the agenda is 13722. It's a resolution authorizing the mayor to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Water Development Authority program and to execute contracts as required and to declare an emergency. This is coming out of service. Ms. Sitterly.
Yeah, I don't think Sean's here, right? So basically, we've been talking about replacing the transfer station. He wants to use ODWA program to pay for it. Right now, the interest rates are running 2.5%, which is ridiculously lower than the market rates. So we want to try to lock that in. The best estimate we have is $2 to $3 million. And I think this is tag teaming with resolution 13822. So we're gonna go out for bids, but we have 2 readings on this first one.
Okay. Let's see. We have on 138, even though they're a companion piece, one's 3 readings, one's 2 readings.
Correct.
So on 13722, you're asking for the 2 readings, and Mrs. Kreitz is your second.
Correct.
For which 2 pieces, Dylan?
137, 138 are companion pieces.
This is, the main agenda both says 3.
Oh, this says 3. Then
Will that work?
I'm sure 3 readings should be the same.
Okay. We don't need to move it up?
I would say for the OWDA, if you could move that up to what Councilman Sitterly said here.
So-
We're
No?
saying no back here. Please, Denise, if you would.
Sorry. Because of the timing of council schedules and everything, this project's going out to bid in January. So 3 readings is fine on the bid piece, and we can't apply for the OWDA loan until the bids are received and executed. So 3 readings is fine on the OWDA.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, so that clarifies that. So 13722 and the companion piece 13822 deal with the South Ewing Street Transfer Station Replacement Project. And we're looking at 3 readings with Ms. Sitterly sponsoring both. Mrs. Kreitz on 13722 will be the second, and Mr. Matlin on 13822 will be the second.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is 13922, a resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate with the county auditor in the Water Pollution Control Fund 6004. It's coming out of water, wastewater. Mr. James.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniel. I'm going to invite Superintendent Nixon to give us a little more information about this. We'll have a lot of extra sludge that'll have to be processed, and I'll let him make a case for the suspension tonight.
Okay, and this can go one or two as council's pleasure. We're trying to look forward for the rest of the year to get through processing biosolids or sludge. We had the plant construction project going on this year, and we typically have 3 million gallons of liquid sludge in storage prior to processing and about 500,000 in our digester. We had to empty 2 of them 1 million gallon storage tanks, so 2 million gallons of sludge and about 500,000 out of our digester to get them empty for construction purposes. So we had to expedite the production of that material. We're at our lowest amount ever, I think, as far as inventory. We have 1 tank that we're currently able to store material in, and it's about half full. It's got about 500,000 gallons in it. So if we don't pass the $200,000 resolution, we'll just have to stop processing sludge and start filling tanks up again. And hopefully the digester's not going to be done for a while. Hopefully the sludge storage tanks are done soon. So I'd like to, if we can, go ahead and approve this $200,000 so we can keep moving forward with processing of the biosolids and getting them out on the farmer's field. Luckily, we've had a nice spring, summer. It was a little wet to start with, but it turned out well that we're able to get this material out on the farmer's field and get it applied and get the material to where it needs to be. The other $50,000 is looking forward to buy chemicals. As we all know, the cost of everything has gone up drastically over the last couple of years. So this material buys the bioxide, which is a chemical at our pump station, to hopefully keep it somewhat fresh from Pierce Avenue out to the Upper Hocking wastewater plant, so it doesn't become too septic before it gets there. And then we utilize sodium hypochlorite for disinfection as well as cleaning membranes. Sodium bisulfite to strip the chlorine out because we can't put chlorinated water in the streams. It is carcinogenic to the aquatic life, and then citric acid to clean membranes. So this $50,000 will be additional so we can buy those 4 chemicals through the end of the year to make sure that we meet our EPA permit and continue cleaning the membranes at the Upper Hocking plant. So looking forward, this amount should get us through the end of the year without any issue.
Good.
Any additional questions on 13922? Mr. James, what's your pleasure?
I thank you again, Chairman Daniel. We are going to ask for suspension tonight, and my second is Mr. Mallon.
All right. We'll ask for suspension on 13922, and Mr. Manton will be second. Resolution 140-22, a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for a contract for mowing and other landscape maintenance services for city cemeteries. Coming out of Public Works, Mr. Schoonover.
Yes, thank you. This is our annual piece to go out to bid for mowing contracts for the cemeteries, as you said. So we did pretty well this year. We changed, I think, some contracts up to, we split Forest Rose, and that was our biggest problem, I think. So we did pretty well this year. I think Greg's got it under control and what we're going to do moving forward. And so we're going to ask for 3 readings on this, like I said, annual piece, and then Mr. James will be my second.
Any questions on 14022? All right, we'll have 3 readings on 14022, and Mr. James is a second. The next items we have on the agenda are ordinance 30 and 31-22. They're the annual ordinances for the developer notes of the Edie Road TIF. Last year, I think Ms. Cruz addressed this. Are you the proper person to address that this year?
I can talk about it this year too. So this is as Don said, the annual legislation. Each year we pay off some of the notes and issue new notes to the developers on those projects, and we are slowly and surely paying those down. We expect these notes will disappear about 2029.
29. Any questions on the renewal of the Edie Road TIF? This is ordinance 30 and 3122. Again, it is an annual piece, and we're moving forward with getting these paid down. So, thank you. This will be a 3 readings, and Mrs. Kreitz, will you be second on that?
Yes.
So 3 readings on 30, ordinance 30 and 3122. All right, do we have any departmental updates? Any departmental updates? Okay, then I will turn this over to President Wolf, tonight's meeting prep.
Thank you very much. We've taken care of most of the agenda this evening, with the exception of, do I have something on my list, Don?
3222.
Yeah, that's the last one we need to look at. We have ordinance 3222 to amend the zoning map for Bowers Park, which is subject to annexation from Greenfield Township, coming through Economic Development. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, this is an ordinance to change the zoning to essentially correspond with all the parks within the city. It would zone it CN, commercial neighborhood. It would allow for concession stand activity and other vendor activity that might take place in the park. And this is required since we've formally annexed that into the city. And it's already been in front of the Planning Commission and been approved. We will need a public hearing, and I think we have that scheduled for November 28th at 6:30 p.m.
Very good. And your second on this?
My second on this would be, yes, Mr. Schoonover.
Okay, and going a full 3 readings. So 3 readings on temporary ordinance 32-22 with Mr. Schoonover as the second, and a public hearing scheduled for November 28th at 6:30 p.m. The only other item I have this evening is to introduce our new 4th Ward Representative, Larry Ailes. Larry, we're just going to let you sort of take it, introduce yourself to the council body and those who are here and watching, and let them know what it is you're doing here.
Years ago, I was on city council when we hired Mike Nixon. So that's, if that's good or bad. It's been a long time. Long time. So I served on city council before as a 2nd Ward councilman. I studied political science. I'm kind of a political animal secretly. I've been waiting for Tom to retire so I lived in the 4th Ward for 33 years, and he finally said he was going to retire, so I said I'd like to try that. So here I am. I've raised my family here. I've lived here all my life. I've worked locally. I worked for National Meter Parts for 20 years. I worked for Monty Black for 12 years. I worked for Brad Hutchison for about 3 years, so I've had some really tough bosses. Don't tell him I said that. That's all I have, really. My wife, forgive me, my wife Kelly has been involved in community action she was there for 40, she started there when she was 19. So, and she retired at 62. So you do the math, I'm not going to tell you. But she was the executive director of community action for the last 20 years that she was there.
Yes.
And my kids are here in Lancaster, and my grandkids are here in Lancaster, and, that's all good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Thank you for your interest and willingness to serve, and welcome to the remainder of the term of City Council here. Yeah, thanks for joining us. All right, with that, I will turn it back to the chairman.
All right. Are there any other items for finance this evening? Any other items for finance?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I will second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
It is 6:20. The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at 6:30.
Sounds good.
You walked down the aisle and promised happily ever after. Sometimes happily ever after means ending a relationship. We know the conversations are not easy. Deciding what's best for you, your children, and your next steps takes work and communication. At Dagger Law, we know there are no monsters in a divorce, only people trying to find their way. Local, trusted, experienced. Dagger Law.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
serious. Good evening. Welcome to Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this day and your many blessings. We thank you for the continued opportunity to serve those who have elected us to these offices. May you guide our hearts tonight. Give us wisdom, leadership, and guidance as we move forward. May we do what is in the best interest of the citizens of Lancaster and this great city, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. We have a special guest tonight. Amelie Baum is here with us, and she is going to help lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you, Amelie. Good job. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers? Here, sorry. Sorry.
You had to think about it for a second.
No, I was talking. Mr. Ailes?
Here.
Mrs. Kreitz? Here. Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Matlin? Here. Mr. McDaniel?
Here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
Ms. Sitterly? Here. And Mrs. Teener? Here.
Let the record reflect that all 9 members of Lancaster City Council are in attendance this evening. Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council go outside the regular order of business to discuss temporary resolution 123-22.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to go outside the regular order of business. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The motion carries. The reason we're outside of the regular order of business is because we have a couple of special guests this evening as we consider this particular resolution, 123-22, authorizing the Service Safety Director to rename North Broad Street in the city of Lancaster for Fran Miller Way for the months of November and December. Commissioner Dave Levacy is here with us, and also Dr. Mark Miller. And Dr. Miller, I understand you want to make a few comments, so please feel free to head to the podium and do so now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, Council, and Council members. I see a lot of familiar faces out here. Fran and I were married for 57 years. I think we were married about a month, and the first thing I knew, we were doing cancer drives. And then it wasn't very long until it was Young Business Women's Association. Then it was a chamber. Then it was a parade, the annual holiday parade, and volunteering at 4-H for 25 years, and Twig 2. And it just went on and on and on. So all of our married life, Fran was devoted to Fairfield County. And besides, she sold real estate. And that was with Gorsuch, and that was a big part of her life. But I do want to appreciate naming Fran, and she would certainly appreciate that. Last fall, in November, she had the annual holiday parade, and she knew things were going bad. And she'd be going to the hospital soon, but she had to get that parade out of the way, and then she had to volunteer at the county fair at the Heritage booth, which she's been doing for 35 years. She got that out of the way, and she went in the hospital, and then didn't get out of the hospital or nursing homes until January, which I took her home to take care of her, and I quit my practice, and she passed away at the hospital. So it's a great loss, but I certainly appreciate tonight and naming Broad Street after her. She would really enjoy that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Miller, and it is a great loss for our community, but it is a life well-lived and invested in the many, many things around Fairfield County that she was involved in, so we're honored to do this evening in honor of Fran.
I also want to mention the Athena Award. That was also a big issue with her. The Athena Award was a big one.
Very good. Well, thank you for being here, sir. Thank you, Commissioner Levacy. We'll ask that the clerk please read the preamble.
It here. Okay. A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to rename North Broad Street in the city of Lancaster to Fran Miller Way. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President. This is truly, I'm honored to sponsor this legislation. Fran is a longtime friend of mine personally. We spent some time together in the summers, and this honor is definitely deserved. So, with that said, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary numbered 123-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 123-22. Further discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Nothing further.
Other discussion on the motion to pass? right, well, I'll just echo Mr. McDaniel's comments and say what an honor it is for us to do this as well. So we're excited to be able to do this and move forward. With that, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 123-22 passes 9-0. We will be having a special ceremony on a date that the law director remembers that I don't have right in front of me.
November 2nd
Very good.
hold on.
She's getting it. November 2nd.
2nd at 10 a.m. at the intersection of Broad and Main Street.
So we will do a special ceremony November 2nd, 10 a.m. at the corner of Main and Broad to unveil the signage. We hope that you will be able to attend, and please invite family members as well. Very good. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we return to regular order of business.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to return the regular order of business. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are back to the regular order of business. Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated October 10th, 2022.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of city officials.
Email dated October the 12th, 2022 regarding Public Works agenda submitted by Mr. Schoonover. An email dated October 12th, 2022 regarding the 2023 proposed budget submitted by Mr. McDaniel. Email dated October 24th, 2022 regarding finance agenda submitted by Mr. McDaniel. And finally, a series of emails regarding temporary resolution 124-22 submitted by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There is one, an email dated October 10th, 2022 regarding the SID request for plan to be filed submitted by Amanda Everett, Executive Director of Destination Downtown and Lancaster Special Improvement District.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communication.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file communications. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We don't have no other special presentations or awards that I'm aware of this evening. Do we have any petitions or memorials?
There are none to be presented.
During this time, Lancaster City Council sets time aside to allow the voters and taxpayers of the city to address us on any item or issue you would like. If you'd like to address Lancaster City Council, we ask that you come forward, sign in at the podium, state your name and address for the record. During this time, City Council will not respond to any questions or comments you have, but may choose to do so at a later time during our meeting. In accordance with the rules of council, we ask that you would keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Let me clarify that this is a time for people to speak that is not related to the two public hearings that we have coming up in just a few moments. So if anyone has any comments outside of the two public hearings, now is your opportunity to come and address City Council. Would anyone like to address City Council this evening? Okay, well, thank you all for being here tonight. Are there reports of standing committees?
There are four. Economic Development Meeting Minutes dated September 1st, 2022, submitted by Mr. McDaniel. Service Committee Meeting Minutes dated October 7th, 2022, submitted by Ms. Sitterly. Water Pollution Control Meeting Minutes dated October 12th, 2022, submitted by Mr. James. And finally, the Finance Committee Meeting Minutes dated October 24th, 2022, submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there reports of special committees?
There are none to be presented.
We now move into the portion of the meeting where we have public hearings. We'll begin with the first public hearing on temporary ordinance 27-22. In a moment, I will ask the clerk to read the preamble of the legislation. Once she does that, those who are in favor of the legislation, those who wish for it to pass, have the opportunity to come to the podium, sign in on the silver clipboard, your name and address, and then as you begin your comments, state the same for the record. Once the proponents, those in favor of the legislation have had opportunity to speak, we will enter into an opportunity for opponents, those opposed to the legislation, to come up and speak. After the opponents finish, we will move into rebuttal, where the proponents, those for the legislation, have opportunity to speak once again. Please note, in order to speak during rebuttal, you have to have spoken in the initial round of comments. And so if you want to be a part of rebuttal, you have to make sure you speak the first opportunity that you have as a proponent or an opponent. During rebuttal, after the proponents, we will have opportunity for the opponents to have rebuttal as well. The same rule holds true. You must have spoken in order to speak in rebuttal. With that, we will then close out after the sponsor of the legislation has opportunity to make final comments. Okay, so with that, we're going to begin with temporary ordinance 27-22. We will ask that the clerk please read the preamble.
An ordinance to vacate a portion of a right-of-way for the Wheeling Street extension that bisects the property located at 1511 through 1513 East Main Street associated with the Creative Recovery LLC development of the site, and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah, just real quick, hopefully everyone got a chance to look at the legislation, which had the City Planning Commission notes attached to it. So we're here for this public hearing. There was one property owner at the time that didn't respond. So this public hearing was required to come before us. So I don't have anyone here from the engineer's office, but it's a pretty standard right-of-way vacation. So if anyone has any questions, we can try and answer them as a group or with Mr. Martin or with Stephanie from the law director's office.
Okay, very good. With that, we will begin with proponent testimony. Those who are in favor of this resolution or ordinance in this case that would like to speak. If you're in favor of this ordinance, please come forward. Is there anyone who'd like to speak in favor? Yes, sir. I'll just note that, again, differing from the opportunity for voters and taxpayers to speak to City Council during this time, members of council may have questions that they will ask you after you finish your comments, so please be prepared to answer those questions. With that, sir, you're free to begin whenever you're ready.
I'm not as fast a writer as I used to be.
It's all right.
Okay. My name is John Inting. I represent the Creative Recovery. So this particular plot of land, it's 2.4 acres. And what we want to do on this property is we'll have a professional office towards the front where we'll do substance abuse and mental health counseling. The rear of the property, we'll do recovery housing for females. This is something that I've been asked about since the day we started here 5 years ago. There's a really big need for it. It's an ideal location. We have the Parks Department on one side, County Commissioner on the other. We do have one small group home on the other side, and then large open land in the back. So it's an ideal location, and it'll fill a really big need for the city and the county.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir. Mr. Mallon.
So you operate other houses in town, right?
Right. We have a men's program that we started in 2017, and it's been growing. You know, we're in the midst of, we have the property at 551 East Main, right beside the BP. So we're getting ready to tear that down and put up a new one. And then, but that's all male. We've been doing this 15 years, Andrea and I, and it's very important that you have a very distinct program for the men and a very distinct program for the women. A lot of different needs, you know, and you get more into custody and minor children and things like that with the females.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, sir, for your comments. We appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak as a proponent in favor of this legislation? Okay, seeing none, are there any opponents who would like to speak in opposition to the legislation this evening? All right, seeing no opponents then, we will move back to the proponent. Sir, if you'd like the opportunity to say anything else, this is it. Nope, he's all set. Okay, very good. We had no opponent testimony, so we will close out the time of rebuttal. I will send it back to Mr. Schoonover for any final comments.
I don't have any further comments this time.
Very good. All right, we will be dealing with this particular piece of legislation later on in tonight's meeting. We will hereby then close the public hearing for temporary ordinance 27-22. We will now begin the public hearing for temporary ordinance 28-22. The same rules apply. I'm going to ask that the clerk read the preamble, and then we will begin proponent and opponent testimony. Clerk Sandy.
An ordinance to amend the City of Lancaster zoning map to change the zoning of 20.7 plus minus acres identified as Fairfield County Auditor Tax Parcel Number 0533008400 from Commercial General to Residential Single Family 4, RS4, and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Ehlers.
Mr. Ehlers.
Yeah, this is just to rezone the land over by Countryside Drive so that they can build about 46 homes. And it's right off of Countryside Drive in Lancaster, Newark Road.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Ehlers. All right. We'll now enter into the testimony for the public hearing. Is there anyone who is a proponent who would like to speak in favor of this legislation? Yes, sir. Come on. You can sign in after the fact if you want to go ahead and state your name and address. And go ahead.
Steve Peck, 400 Stonehenge Boulevard, Dublin, Ohio. The project we're proposing is a partnership between Epcon Communities and REM Developments. Epcon Communities obviously is very active up in Columbus and other parts of the country, but we're interested in coming to Lancaster. These will be detached for-sale homes, 55 plus, age targeted. We will be providing full maintenance to the exterior yards, snow removal, all maintained through the HOA. I know this property has a long history in town with some other proposals, and I think we've had a really good reception with the Planning Commission with this proposal. But just here to answer any questions if you have any.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Does anyone have any questions this evening? Okay. Mr. Peck, thank you for being here. You're signing in, so I appreciate that.
Yep.
As he finishes that, is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of as a proponent to this ordinance? Okay, if not, are there any opponents to ordinance 28-22? Seeing no opponents, we'll move back to you, Mr. Peck, for any rebuttal.
Nope.
You're all set? Very good. All right, and with no opponents, we will then close down the testimony portion of this public hearing and send it back to Mr. Ehlers.
I have nothing further at this moment.
Very good. With no further comments or questions, we will consider the public hearing for temporary ordinance 28-22 to be closed. We will now move on to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the third reading of temporary resolution 117-22.
Oops, I'm giving you my call sheet. You get to do the call. A resolution to appropriate funds in the Cemetery Fund 2007, amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor, and increase receipts for the reimbursement from an insurance carrier for damages to city property, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and err upon the written record temporary resolution 11722.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 117-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover?
Just real quick, we're accepting a insurance check for damage done to the fence at Forest Rose Cemetery off of 158. Yeah, 158.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 117-22 passes 9-0. We now have second reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 124-22. Oh, there you go. All right.
Okay, bear with me. A resolution to schedule Lancaster City Council meetings for 2023, offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 124-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 124-22. Discussion, Ms. Kreitz.
Yes, we need to get this room reserved because so many people use it that it fills up fast.
Very good. That's the reason for suspension. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, thank you. Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 124-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 124-22. Discussion, Mrs. Kreitz.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 124-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 125-22.
A resolution authorizing the law director to negotiate and enter into a contract with the city of Pickerington for prosecution of adult misdemeanor traffic and criminal offenses committed in the city of Pickerington within Fairfield County, Ohio, and to accept payment, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporary number 125-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 125-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary numbered 125-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 125-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. 125, 126-22, and 127-22 are all resolutions authorizing the law director to enter into a contract to prosecute for misdemeanors, traffic and criminal offenses for Pickerington, Reynoldsburg, and Fairfield County. So they're all similar. Actually, they're the same, just for different jurisdictions for her to enter into a contract and prosecute these offenses on behalf of those jurisdictions. So it's a simple yearly thing that she has to go through to sign these contracts and move forward with the prosecution of these cases.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
That was the motion to pass, wasn't it? Yeah.
Pass and gross, yes.
Yeah. Temporary resolution 125-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 126-22.
A resolution authorizing the law director to negotiate and enter into a contract with the city of Reynoldsburg for the prosecution of adult misdemeanor traffic and criminal offenses committed in the city of Reynoldsburg within Fairfield County, Ohio, and to accept payment, offered by Mr. McDaniels and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 126-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 126-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 126-22.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 126-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
This is the same as 125-22, and it deals with the city of Reynoldsburg.
Very good, thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 126-22 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 127-22.
A resolution authorizing the law director to negotiate and enter into a contract with the Fairfield County Board of Commissioners for the prosecution of adult misdemeanor traffic and criminal offenses committed in the villages and unincorporated areas within Fairfield County, Ohio, and to accept payment. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 12722.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 127-22. Mr. McDaniel.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 12722.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 127-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yeah, once again, this is the same as 125 and 12622, and deals with the villages and unincorporated areas within Fairfield County.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 127-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 130-22.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement Program and to execute contracts as required. Offered by Mr. James and seconded by Ms. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 130-22.
Yes. Oh, second, sorry. Sorry.
Oh, my word. Okay.
anxious there.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 130-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Yeah, briefly, you want to be able to participate in these particular things to get funding down the road. We're asking for suspension tonight because there is some time element here to get these things done.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. James. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Well, I know Becky's vote already. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. James.
Thank you, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 130-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 130-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 130-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 131-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the South Water Treatment Plant Disinfection Improvement Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 131-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 131-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Just briefly, this gives us the opportunity to get out this particular system out for bid. That's why we're asking for a suspension tonight.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon a written record temporary resolution 131-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 131-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 131-22 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 133-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor and the general fund 1001 to cover rising cost of electric for the city of Lancaster, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 13322.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of Temporary Resolution 133-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 13322.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 133-22. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, as we all know, electric costs have risen for everyone. We're requesting $35,000 to be added for the remainder of 2022 to cover these costs.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Weren't we in the thing that kept the rate the same so that it didn't go up?
The rate can go up.
Yeah.
These are streetlights mostly, and they're set by PUCO on
You mentioned that
some of
last
the
meeting. Yeah.
charges that they put, but also we have meters downtown. All this electric is covering our street lighting mostly.
Okay.
It's
Any
not
other-
the electric to the buildings, but
I remember that now. Thank you. Other questions? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 133-22 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 134-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for ductile water line and appurtenances for the Western Water Transmission Line, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 134-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of Temporary Resolution 134-22. Discussion, Mr. James?
Briefly, we're asking for suspension because there is a 70-week lead time for this particular ductile iron pipe. And given when we need the pipe, we need to start asking for bids now.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Did you say yes? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
sorry.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Knoll. I'd like to now make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution 134-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 134-22. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ailes? Ayers, excuse me, Mr.
Yes.
Ayers. I knew that was going to happen. Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 134-22 passes 9-0. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with Temporary Resolution 135-22.
A resolution to authorize the issuance of a then and now certificate to reimburse the Fairfield County Common Pleas Court, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of Temporary Resolution 135-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 135-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover?
Yeah, just real quick, we already approved this expense in 114-22, but it was $6 over the amount where we would require then and now, so this piece just takes care of that.
$6?
Yeah.
Okay. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 13522.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 135-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover?
Not worth the $6.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 135-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 136-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor in the Park and Recreation Fund 2012 to cover payroll for the remainder of 2022, offered by Ms. Sitterly and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Ms. Sitterly.
As discussed in the finance meeting, first of 3 readings.
First of 3 readings on temporary resolution 136-22. Temporary resolution 137-22.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Water Development Agency program and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency, offered by Ms. Sitterly, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Ms. Sitterly.
First of 3 readings.
First of 3 readings on temporary resolution 137-22. Temporary resolution 138-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the transfer station replacement project and declaring an emergency, offered by Ms. Sitterly, seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Ms. Sitterly.
First of 3 readings.
First of 3 readings on temporary resolution 138-22. Temporary resolution 139-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor in the Water Pollution Control Fund 6004, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Noel. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 139-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 139-22. Mr. James.
As Superintendent Nixon pretty aptly explained in the Finance Committee meeting, this is about $200,000 for additional sludge hauling and another $50,000 for chemicals that we're going to need in the upcoming few months here to make sure that project remains on track.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 9-0. Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Noel. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon a written record temporary resolution 139-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 139-22. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 139-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 140-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and contract for mowing and other landscape maintenance services for the city cemeteries, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
First of 3 readings, please.
First of 3 readings on temporary resolution 140-22. Are there any further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to the reading of ordinances, beginning with third reading of temporary ordinance 27-22.
An ordinance to vacate a portion of right-of-way for the Wheeling Street extension that bisects the property located at 1511 through 1513 East Main Street associated with the Creative Recovery LLC development of this site and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 2722.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 27-22. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
I don't have anything.
Okay. Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 27-22 passes 9-0. We'll say thank you once again to all the folks from Creed who are out there who attended the meeting tonight. temporary ordinance 28-22.
An ordinance to amend the City of Lancaster zoning map to change the zoning of 20.7 plus minus acres identified as the Fairfield County tax parcel number 0533008400 from commercial general to residential single family for RS4 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. Ayers and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Ayers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 28-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 28-22. Discussion, Mr. Ayers.
I have none.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Ms. Teener.
I do have a question. Is this, any of this going to be a tax abatement, or they don't have to pay taxes up to, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 28-22 passes 9-0. We will likewise thank those who came tonight representing this project as well. Thank you for being here. Temporary ordinance 29-22.
An ordinance to amend Part 9, Streets, Utilities, and Public Services, Title 3, Public Utilities, Chapter 911, Water, Section 911.07D, Capacity Charges for Water, Chapter 912, Capacity Charge for Trunk Sanitary Sewer Benefit, Chapter 915, Sewer Rates, Section 915.04A, User Rates and Charges, Chapter 915, Sewer Rates, Section 915.05A, Strength Surcharge, and Chapter 916, Wastewater Pretreatment, Section 916.08C, Strength Surcharge of Codified Ordinances of the City of Lancaster, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon a written record temporary ordinance number 29-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 29-22. Discussion, Mr. James?
Yes, briefly, we've had the opportunity to discuss this in several other meetings prior to this. Any time that you make a decision that's going to affect the pocketbooks of not only our constituents, but any residences of our city, and sometimes it's your family members as well as your friends, you have to take those pretty seriously, and certainly that, anytime you do that, none of that's lost on me, as I'm sure that anybody that has to vote on this tonight will certainly feel the same way. But at the end of the day, you've got to realize that at some point in time, you need to have the proper facilities to treat all the wastewater that we generate, and to maintain all of the, satisfy all the regulations that we have to for discharge into the public waterways. This gives us the opportunity to not only position ourselves from an economic development standpoint, but also down the road to have facilities that will get us many years in the future. And that's one of the reasons why I fully support this particular ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. James. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Mr. Ayers.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a quick statement. I would like to thank Denise for her presentations and for answering my questions quickly and timely. However, with the discussions I've had with my constituents and the fears that some of them have with how they'll be able to afford it, I will have to be a no vote tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Ayers. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Ms. Teener.
I've thought about this a lot, and I don't miss council very often. And I actually had plans to be someplace tonight, and I let Mr. President Uhl know. But I had to weigh, do I want to go away for a couple days, because I never do, to get away, or stay here for this vote? So I actually canceled what I was going to do tonight, because this is a very important vote. I'm going to be a no vote. My constituents are having a hard time. I had talked to Mr. Nixon we had a big conversation last week, and I understood his points, and I think he understood mine. But even as a single woman, we have veterans, fixed incomes, family, single parents, private business owners, and this isn't where we're stopping. They might want you to think, oh, this is just tonight. Well, your gas rates here are going to go up. Sanitation will too, but that's just something they don't want to talk about. Because I was in a meeting a month ago, but that wasn't supposed to be discussed with the public. So that's going to end up happening. I can see it happening. So I'm a no vote. We're gonna have the permanent parks tax levy, we're gonna have our property taxes raised. I just don't think people are going to be able to do it, and I don't know as a city within the general fund that we've been really that fiscally conservative as everybody says, oh, we're a Republican council. I'm not seeing it. I mean, we're paying for a city hall to get a group to come in. That's coming out, I believe, the general fund, whatever, is that correct? We're having, what else? We hired a lady to hire a planning, what was it, a city planner, when even Mr. McDaniel was saying about what the city planner will do. Well, that's what our economic development person does. So I don't think until we can show the taxpayers we are fiscally responsible that we should be asking for their water rates to be raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Teener. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Anyone else? Last call. Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
No.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
No.
Temporary ordinance 29-22 passes 7-2. We now have first reading on a series of ordinances, beginning with the temporary ordinance 30-22.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of revenue notes in the aggregate principal amount of $893,682.40 to pay costs of improving Edie Road, Memorial Drive, and Michaels Way by grading, widening, paving, curbing, and improving bridges and railroad crossings, relocating utilities, and installing sidewalks, traffic signals and signs, and water, sanitary, and stormwater lines and facilities, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
First of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 30-22. Temporary ordinance 31-22.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of revenue notes in the aggregate principal amount of $277,201.56 to reimburse Flagstar Bank, FSB, for a draw on a letter of credit in connection with costs of improving Edie Road, Memorial Drive, and Michaels Way by grading, widening, paving, curbing, and improving bridges and railroad crossings, relocating utilities, and installing sidewalks, traffic signals, and signs, and water, sanitary, and stormwater lines and facilities, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel.
Also first of three readings.
First three readings on temporary ordinance 31-22. Temporary ordinance 32-32. 32-22. That's the one. You got it.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only one who gets tongue-tied. An ordinance amending the zoning map subject to passage of the annexation of 20.611 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, this is the first of three readings, and we will have a public hearing on this on November 28th at 6:30 p.m.
Very good, thank you. First of three readings then on temporary ordinance 32-22. Are there any further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, there's no tabled legislation tonight for us to consider. Is there any unfinished business? Ms. Teener?
Did we look into anything to Bush Hill and Columbus Street yet? Mr. McDaniel, did you look into any of that, the intersection by chance?
We haven't received anything yet. I think the safety committee was gonna look at that one day.
Okay. Thank
We
you.
meet
Staff safety committee.
Okay,
Internal
thank you.
staff meeting. We meet
Okay.
next Friday.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Teener. Further unfinished business? Mr. Martin, have you gotten any other comments, positive or negative, about the changes on Fair Avenue?
So, I think it's been going rather good myself.
Well, I agree, but has the public said anything? Have you heard
I've
anything
not
else?
had any negative comments reach the mayor's office or myself, emails.
Okay.
I don't know about social media, those avenues right there. I don't have time to pay attention to all that, but, I mean, Councilman Ailes and Ayers, you know, we've talked about it, so what do you think?
You'll get it soon, it's Ehlers, but you're almost
Ehlers.
there. Yeah, you got it.
Ehlers. I've known Larry longer. Sorry, Larry.
I could just add to that. I sent letters to all the people right there, like, that I would consider directly impacted by the change. and just asking them to, contact me by email or phone, and I had, I think 95% of them called me and said, this is great, and whatever complaints I think the one lady said, whatever complaints they are stupid.
There we are.
Those were her exact words, so.
All right, we should invite her more often to come to the council. Thank you. All right, well, I appreciate the update. I just wanted to check, as I know we had heard initial, rumblings, and people may show up, this, that, and the other, and that could happen in the future.
Yeah, it was just one initial, probably the first day it opened up.
Okay.
But I think once they found out how that they can safely get in and out, it's not impacted them. Now, our downtown parking might be a different issue. But,
I have seen a number of people parking head in. It always surprises me when they do that. Nevertheless, I saw the big signs now you have up that say back.
Yeah, we're gonna be addressing that on Friday as well. We're still just looking at warnings, issues. Everybody that pulls in wrong doesn't realize that you should not be crossing double yellow line to go over. You're actually doing 2 parking infractions, crossing the middle center line as well as parking the wrong way. But we're gonna be kind. I think when people do that, they realize when they back out, it's much worse because they're backing out to 2 crossroads of traffic.
Yeah, I would think almost exclusively it's people crossing the center line from the one over, right? That's about the only way you could squarely get into one of those spots. Front
It's
end.
so tempting to see an empty lot, and just go in. I think in front of the post office is gonna be our biggest challenge. So we're gonna be talking about the signage a little bit different. We gotta put permanent signs up just in case, try to do a better job on that, but, I mean, it's gonna take some time. There is some other places in Ohio that have this, but it doesn't matter where it's at, it's right here that we're dealing with, so.
Yeah, that's right. And, in front of the post office may be our greatest challenge, but it's also where I think the most near misses were, as people were trying to inch out, of those spots with the number of people that visit there, so. So are police officers regularly down in that area?
I think I'm down there more than they are.
They're not letting you issue warnings, are they?
I can't walk down there, and I mean, one time I probably talked to 10 people just helping them out and helping them educating, but that's when I'm going from one direction to the next. But, I think it's getting better. I think having more cars parked right really does help. But I've seen cars parked right, like they're supposed to be, and people still pull straight in because it's the easiest way to do to get where they want to go.
Sure.
They realize it after they back out, and I think that's where hopefully they don't get hit. I saw one car back out, and all of a sudden, they backed into the line where there's another car. They didn't go all the way over to the other side, and they go, oh, this is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
So, we'll keep working at it.
All right.
We'll be
Very
kind
good.
right now.
Sure, I think that's appropriate. All right, very good. Further unfinished business this evening? Anyone have new business this evening?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. McDaniel?
I'd like to make a recommendation to council on our committee assignments now that Mr. Ailes is on council. In the past, since I've been on council, we've replaced the new council people appointed and placed them into the committees that well, in this case, Mr. Stoughton vacated. So I'd like to recommend that we place Mr. Ailes on Code Enforcement and Zoning as a member, on Economic Development as the chairman. Replacing me, I would remain a member. And again, Mr. Stoughton was on all 3 of these committees. And then on Finance as a member. So again, place Mr. Ailes as a member on Code Enforcement and Zoning, as the chairman of Economic Development, and as a member of Finance, and then I would become a member of Economic Development instead of the chair.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to make these committee appointments as outlined by Mr. McDaniel. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Very good. Motion carries 9-0. Thank you very much. Mr. McDaniel, again, for your willingness to take over finance. Mr. Ailes, welcome to these 3 committees.
Thank you.
All right, is there further new business this evening? If not, surely everyone realizes this by now, but I'll just make mention because I have 2 kids. Trick or treat is Monday from 6 to 7:30. Is that correct? Why are you looking at me like that?
You said Monday?
It's next Monday.
Oh.
Next Monday, the 31st.
It
Do
better
you
not be
not
going
know
on
when
right
it
now.
is? To be clear, trick or treat is Monday the 31st from 6 to 7:30, right?
Monday right now.
Okay, yes, next Monday. All right. Any other new business tonight? If not, we'll ask the clerk read our announcement of scheduled meetings.
Okay, we have 3 meetings left this year, November 14th, November 28th, and December 12th. All meetings are held here in council chambers at 6:30 p.m. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Law, November 2nd at 11:30 at the 1897 conference room. Code Enforcement, November 7th at 7:30 a.m. at the 1897 conference room. Water Pollution, November 9th at 8:30 a.m. at the 1897 conference room. Safety, November 14th at 7:30 a.m. at the 1897 conference room. Finance, November 14th at 6 p.m. here in council chambers. Economic Development, November 17th at 7:30 a.m. at the 1897 conference room. And finally, IT Telecom, November 18th at 8 a.m. at the 1897 conference room.
Thank you very much. Are there any bills this evening?
There's 2 bills. Spotlight Trophy and Awards, $12 for the nameplate, and MNCO, $112.30 for publication of legislation, both paid for with our PNC card, for a total of $124.30.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pay the bills.
We have a motion and a second to pay the bills. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I know of no need for an executive session this evening, therefore a motion to adjourn is in order.
Mr. President, I would like to make that motion. We adjourn.
A motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Please remember to sign your legislation. Have a great evening. We are adjourned.
You walked down the aisle and promised happily ever after. Sometimes happily ever after means ending a relationship. We know the conversations are not easy. Deciding what's best for you, your children, and your next steps takes work and communication. At Dagger Law, we know there are no monsters in a divorce, only people trying to find their way. Local, trusted, experienced. Dagger Law.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our 2 locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.